Marvel Studios' The Marvels, the sequel to the very successful Captain Marvel movie, has gone down in infamy, and basically it was such an enormous bomb, and people were kind of forecasting it and could see what was going to happen for such a long time. I think it's going to be quite a substantial period of time before people stop comparing anything that isn't successful to what the Marvels has done. Obviously, Aquaman the Lost Kingdom was compared to the Marvels on its opening weekend, and it did not do very well, especially domestically. It was definitely lagging behind what the Marvels had done, but it was doing much better overseas. And when I talked about the opening weekend box office of Aquaman the Lost Kingdom, I did make a prediction that not only would it do better than the Marvels overall, like throughout the box office life of the film, but I thought it would do substantially better because of a few key determining factors. And it turns out I was kind of right, because Aquaman the Lost Kingdom is absolutely destroying the Marvels at the box office now. And let's hear about some of these new details that we have. After its second weekend in movie theaters, Aquaman the Lost Kingdom has surpassed $250 million at the global box office per the numbers. That's significantly higher than the total pulled in by the MCU's latest film, The Marvels, which was released on November 10 with just over $200 million earned. Both movies are considered to be disappointments by their respective studios. And though Aquaman 2 had a less impressive domestic opening than The Marvels, it made up a lot more money overall, giving DC Studios and Warner Bros. Discovery a small win. Certainly a small win to this point. And let's keep in mind that $200 million for The Marvels is over the life of the film, in theatrical release, whereas the $250 million that Aquaman the Lost Kingdom has done is only after the second weekend of release for Aquaman. So it's actually doing a substantially better than what the Marvels ended up doing. Yes, it has caught up at the domestic box office, and it continues to absolutely smoke the Marvels basically worldwide, which we kind of knew was going to happen, because the reason the first Aquaman movie went well over $1 billion, so was at $1.15 billion, was because the Asian market absolutely supported this film. They supported it en masse. And once again, it's doing much better there. There's certainly no way that this Aquaman sequel is ever going to touch the initial $1.15 billion that the first movie did, but it's certainly going to do far better than the Marvels does throughout the life of it. And I do find this kind of funny. People were saying, ha ha, the DCEU, the last movie, you couldn't even beat the Marvels, which it shouldn't be able to beat the Marvels, because the MCU is still a real franchise. It's still alive. The DCEU is dead. It's been dead for like a year and a half now, and they basically just been trickling out the last remnants of whatever it is that they had left. Obviously, Aquaman the Lost Kingdom being the final film, and somehow a movie connected to a dead universe was able to beat out what should be one of the flagship titles of the entire MCU moving forward. We are likely to see Captain Marvel be one of the leaders, if not the leaders, of the Avengers and Avengers 5 and obviously Secret Wars, as we come up to this big reset for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where they bring in the heroes that actually can put butts in seats back. And I think this is an enormous black eye that anything associated with the DCEU, especially in 2023, would be able to outperform or outdo an MCU movie, and really does paint not a great picture about the momentum of the MCU, but certainly a disastrous picture about the Marvels and the fact that they ever even greenlit this project. They got very lucky that Captain Marvel was an exceptionally successful film at the box office because of where it was parked and what we were told to believe about it. Turned out none of that was true, and there just wasn't much going for it. Both movies have the same domestic box office, around $84 million, but it's the international audience that makes up the big difference. Aquaman 2 has a foreign box office of $173.6 million, while the Marvels bombed with just $121 million. Aquaman 2 also saw a 29.6% drop-off from week 1 to week 2. The Marvels, it's the worst performing superhero movie of all time, dropping a massive 78.1%. When I recorded the last video talking about this, I was like, it can't be 78%. It had to have been 68%, because like an 80% drop off is like unimaginable almost for any movie, especially an MCU movie. But yes, it was 78%. That just tells you just how god awful the word of mouth was for the Marvels, and how low they've sent like the benchmark for a successful big franchise movie to be done, with superheroes or whatever. A 78% drop off, beating Morbius, an objectively terrible movie. Whereas we see Aquaman 2 might not have had the greatest accolades when it came to the critics or whatever. Like a 30% drop off is absolutely amazing, especially when you have movies coming out in 3,000 to 4,000 theaters, domestically at a time, basically almost everybody that wants to see the movie gets to see the movie on opening weekend, certainly suggests that people were hesitant. They realized the DCEU brain is dead. And did they want to go see the follow-up to another movie that they like? Well, they got the good word of mouth that certainly helped it out, which is something that really ended up helping out Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in the long run, to where it didn't have just that disastrous word of mouth that the Marvels had, where it's like, you don't want to watch this. This isn't a good movie. People were saying, if you like Aquaman, you're probably going to like Aquaman 2. It's a good, faithful successor to the original movie. If you like that one, come back for more. And it sounds like people did. Is it going to make a ton of money? It doesn't appear so. In fact, I would imagine it's going to lose money. I don't even think it'll hit $500 million, but it is absolutely going to pace the crapola out of the Marvels. And don't forget, the Marvels was also a film that was more expensive to develop than the Aquaman sequel. While the Marvels reportedly had a budget of around $275 million, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom cost around $205 million, though both productions also added additional funding into the marketing costs. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom was also the end of the DCEU timeline, while the MCU continues to move on after the Marvels, though both films have also had their returns affected by superhero fatigue. And when you look at that $275 million budget for the Marvels, and you add probably like $150 million just for the marketing, we're talking about a movie that needed to generate $425 million, after theaters took their percentage or whatever, just to break even, with marketing costs involved in there. And it made $200 million. The expected cut from theaters is going to be about 50%. So it probably made like $100 million and lost $325 million total. That is going to be one of the biggest bombs of all time. It sounds like it'll probably even go down as a bigger bomb than maybe even Indiana Jones, which had a bigger budget and did not perform very well, but ended up doing better over the life of the film, much better than even the Marvels did. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, $205 million is not a small amount of money, but there was almost no marketing behind it. They didn't even have a big trailer like 6 months out, 3 months out. They waited for the very last minute, and it wasn't inundated everywhere. I bet their marketing budget was much closer to $100 million. So they needed to make $305 million probably just to get out of the red. When at $250 million, you take out the 50% cut, you're talking about $125 million. So they would need to make like $180 million more or like $360 million worldwide box office. Not likely to happen. I do not expect the Aquaman sequel to end up generating money. I expect it to lose money, but it's not going to lose nearly as much as The Flash or the Marvels did in the long term. And I'm glad my prediction ended up working. Basically, you could just kind of look at what the market was doing. It was going to be very difficult for any movie to ever have the second week drop off that the Marvels had. There's a reason it was the record. It's the worst thing that's ever happened. Didn't expect it to be a 30% drop off. That's a fantastic hold on the audience for Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, but it was also doing so much better overseas. And the original was absolutely supported overseas as well. It wasn't really propped up by two movies that everybody around the world wanted to see at the same time. And it definitely feels like the Captain Marvel box office was AstroTurf. And there was probably a chance to make money on this Aquaman sequel if they released it not 5 years later. Maybe if they released it 2 years later or 3 years later. I think they wasted way too much time. And obviously, in the meantime, the announcement that the DCEU was dead made it kind of a dead movie. And congratulations to James Wan and Jason Momoa for at least fighting and putting out a movie that people wanted to see. Unfortunately, it just was not meant to be. But this will not be the last we see, or it is not the last we assume that we're going to see of Jason Momoa in the DCU. If Aquaman 2 had a better showing, there may have been a third movie ordered at Warner Brothers Discovery, but it now seems unlikely that will come to pass. Even so, it's been made clear that Jason Momoa will always have a home at DC, so there's a good chance fans will continue to see him in comic book movie roles in the DCU. There are rumors that he might play a live-action incarnation of Lobo in the DCU as well, though that hasn't been officially confirmed at this time. But it feels like it's all but unofficially confirmed at this time. And that's kind of the character when you think of the DC heroes that Jason Momoa is always born to play. The comic book Lobo has a lot more in common with the Aquaman from the movies than Aquaman from the comic books does. It was almost like Lobo being Aquaman himself, where he was this kind of like dude bro or whatever. That's not really who Arthur Curry has ever been in the comic book. So just as far as the character design, it really fits Lobo. Just as far as the character's attitude and the lines that he delivers, Jason Momoa should be able to do that without a problem, and it should be very exciting. But of course, we do need to see the DCU be successful that all hinges on Superman Legacy and James Gunn's 10-year plan, and however he decides to introduce Lobo into that universe. I am not completely optimistic. In fact, I'm very cynical about the prospects of the DCU at this point. But I would love to be proven wrong, and I would love to see Jason Momoa as Lobo. I think he did a really good job playing Lobo as Aquaman, and he would do an even better job playing Lobo as Lobo, and that could be a whole lot of fun. If you would like more conversations about box office and trends and everything and what's going on in the pop culture sphere related to comic books, but not all comic book related, I do a podcast every Wednesday on my Patreon with my good friend Aaron Sparrow, The Geek Fix. In fact, I'm recording it here in about another hour and a half for this week. If you have not checked this one out, it's on the $10 tier. The Sparrow's Never Ending Christmas Tree. Definitely check that one out. Everyone loves Aaron Sparrow, not as much as I do. He's a great guy, and we have a lot of fun talking about all the stuff around pop culture, and especially toys. He is the toy aficionado himself, and there's a link in the video description if you would like to check out the Patreon for more Thinking Critical content in a little bit longer form factor.